Hello and welcome to another edition of the LSU Sports Insider Podcast, brought to you by The Advocate, theadvocate.com, the Times-Picayune, and NOLA.com. I'm Advocate Sports columnist Scott Rabalais, joined today in studio by Koki Riley, who is almost as big a movie buff as I am. He's probably better on the newer movies, actually, like things from the last 10 or 15 years. But Koki, how are you?
Doing really well. How's it going?
I'm doing well. It's been a long time since I've seen a movie in the theater. We're gonna have to find a movie we like and go to a movie sometime.
Yeah, we'll find the time this summer.
I hope so. So we're here as we are in our podcast, but you'll notice a couple of changes if you've been a regular viewer or listener to our podcast in the past. First of all, our now former sports editor, Perrin Keyes, has left us. He's taken a new gig to be a sports editor of the Buffalo News. We wish Perrin the best of luck up there, especially this January when he's up to his beard at Lake Effect Snow, and he's going to be looking for someone to help shovel his driveway. But it won't be us.
No, it won't be.
You've probably shoveled a little snow. Koki's from Massachusetts. You probably shoveled a little snow. You're not eager to do that again.
It's a lot in the back, It's just a lot on the back.
Get a lot of snow in Buffalo, so we're gonna see how much Perrin likes it there once that happens. But since it's summer, we're only coming to you once a week. We may move things around with different hosts and different guests just to see what happens between now and probably SEC Media Days, which is when football season really starts for us at SEC Media Days, which this year will be in Dallas, July 15th through 18th. Move things to the west a little bit because Texas and Oklahoma are joining the league. It's also going to be the same time as the All-Star Game is in Arlington this year. So.
And the MLB Draft, which is
MLB Draft. Yeah.
We'll be talking about a little bit on the show.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot going on then. But for now, we have some other topics to talk about. Whenever we're here on the LSU Tigers. LSU Sports Insider, rather. You can find us on the LSU Tigers NOLA.com YouTube channel. That's what I was trying to say. We're also on Apple Podcast and on Spotify. So bookmark us or follow us or light a candle, whatever you like to do, just to make sure that you're following us every week as we give you the latest insights and talk about the big topics concerning LSU athletics. So before we go any further and get into those topics, we're going to pause right now for a word from Caesars Sportsbook.
Hoop fans, take the court with Caesars Sportsbook. Place your pregame bets now. Build parlays and same-game parlays, then combine them into super parlays for a chance at greater payouts. And with quick picks, Caesars turns the biggest stories of the game into pre-built parlays you can just tap right into. So don't just watch basketball. Download Caesars Sportsbook and experience it like never before. Caesars Sportsbook, the only sportsbook app with Caesars rewards.
Koki, I was a little concerned about a couple of things about the podcast. First of all, that they said, you hosted, Scott, when Perrin left. So hopefully I'm not going to be in this spot every single time, but we're trying to make do today. And then the second of all, what are we going to talk about? Everything's done at LSU. Baseball season is over. Though we were very close to you and I being in Omaha in Omaha. I think if LSU could have beaten North Carolina in that game 3 of the regional final, game 7, that they come home, they play host West Virginia Super Regional. I think they're going to win, and I think they're going to go. I mean, it turns out anytime LSU doesn't make it to Omaha, it's a disappointment. But it turned out to be it was very close to being something quite different.
Yeah, it was an Omaha matchup in a regional. That's the way I look at it because of LSU's talent and how highly regarded they were heading into the season, and UNC's talent, how well they played throughout the entire season. I mean, they ended up only losing, 3 games at home the entire year. They won the ACC regular season title. They have tons of guys who at least have pro potential, and a guy in Vance Honeycutt who's probably going to be a first-round pick. So, UNC was one of the most well-rounded, most talented teams they faced all year, and even though they're not even in the SEC.
So, and it turns out in Omaha, it's an SEC, ACC invitational, basically. 4 SEC teams, 4 ACC teams, and we're going to see who comes out on top in a couple of weeks in Omaha. So we'll still be watching and keeping up with that. But for LSU right now, the focus has gone to next season. Replenishing the roster, trying to put together a team that is good enough to be a national contender once again. And the transfer portal will be very big on that. So, who's in, who's out? Give us a synopsis of the transfer portal and where LSU's gone so far, and who has decided to leave?
Yeah, so far LSU's added 3 names from the transfer portal, at least from Division I schools. That's not including the 5 junior college commitments they got while the season was still going on, even before the year, in a couple of those guys' cases. But just to stick with the 3 guys to keep this organized, right? Since there's so many names flying in and out,
right,
because we're just in that time of year for LSU baseball. So, for one, the first man to sort of commit to the team was Chandler Dorsey, a relief pitcher at USF, right-hander, has pretty good velocity, pretty good strikeout rates, ERA under 4 this past season. He'll be I believe he'll be a junior heading into next year, if I'm remembering that correctly. So he's going to be an important piece of the bullpen for this upcoming season. Similar to the sort of the roles that the guys like Justin Lohr and Fidel Ulloa played this past year, and we'll get to them later. But the two biggest names they've had so far, regardless of where they've come from, is Luis Hernandez, a first baseman at Indiana State. He had 23 home runs this past season, gives them the sort of pop they really need with Tommy White out the door and with Jared Jones potentially out the door as well. And then in the pitching side, Zac Cowan, a right-handed pitcher out of Wofford. LSU fans are probably pretty familiar with him because there was a lot of there was an expectation that he was going to start against LSU in that first game of the Chapel Hill Regional, but they actually ended up holding him back because he just hadn't had enough rest because of all the innings he threw at the Southern Conference tournament for Wofford, just so Wofford could get into the NCAA tournament. But very pitchable guy, has a really, really good changeup.
He didn't pitch against LSU at all.
No, he never pitched against LSU at all. But he was Wofford's best pitcher objectively throughout this entire season. 3.35 ERA, 110 innings. Not a big stuff guy in terms of his fastball, but has a really good changeup, can locate his pitches. And Jay Johnson spoke very highly of him when I asked him about Cowan specifically just before the start of the Chapel Hill Regional. And those comments became very valuable now that he's an LSU Tiger. So he's the sort of starting pitcher they need with Luke Holman and Gage Jump almost certainly off the MLB draft. So those are the 3 names to really concentrate on in terms of the transfers they've gotten from D1 guys. And they also had 5 JUCO players. Tanner Reeves from Blinn College. He just won the Junior College World Series with them. Was one of their better hitters, hit 370 this season, hit 420 with 20 homers the year before. He can play at least according to Jay Johnson, he can play every position but pitcher and catcher. So he's a very versatile guy and could be very helpful for this team as they try to build out the rest of this roster. They added Trevor Schmidt, who's like a first baseman outfield type with some pop. They added Blaze Priester, a catcher. These are the junior college guys. Blaze Priester, a catcher who was actually at LSU for a brief period.
I was going to say, the name sounds familiar.
Yeah.
He's coming back.
Exactly. And I believe it was ahead of the 2022 season. It's hard to keep up with the years at this point with some of these guys, but he was a very productive junior college player the last 2 years at Meridian. And he at least adds catcher depth to where they desperately need it with Travinsky and Milazzo now out of eligibility. And then then you had Daniel Harden, who's an outfielder that Jay Johnson wasn't really willing to talk too much about, but he's a Baton Rouge kid, an outfielder. And then that's 4. And then Connor Ware, that's the 5th guy, left-handed pitcher, the only junior college pitcher they've added, at least to this point. Had very low ERAs the last 2 years, under 2, but has dealt with some injuries. So it'll be interesting to see what he can sort of offer. This team still needs a lot of left-handed pitching because there's a lot of guys who are kind of in flux as to whether they're going to come back or not, or they're just out of eligibility or in the transfer portal leaving already.
Speaking of that, who are the bigger names that have put their names in the portal so far for LSU?
Well, speaking of left-handed pitching, one of the biggest names is Cam Johnson. We've talked about him a lot on this show as the extremely talented freshman who came to LSU despite the fact that he had a chance to go in the first round of last year's MLB draft. Things just never really clicked for him this year. There was a point during about the midway point of SEC play where it felt like he was sort of figuring things out and throwing in some SEC games, but by the end of the year he was out of the shuffle again, and he wasn't even
on the postseason roster.
He was not on
right?
the postseason roster. Right. Yes, I was going to mention that, and in this era of college baseball, sometimes that just happens, right? Where you have a highly touted guy and he just doesn't really pan out, whether it's a year or 2 years. In the case of Paxton Kling, which is why I mentioned that, who was another highly touted guy who at least had the potential to be a first round pick, or at least a pick in the first 2 rounds as a top 50-ish prospect in that draft. He comes to LSU. He he starts a little bit as a freshman, shows some promise, and then this season it just didn't really work out for him. I mean, offensively, he just didn't hit enough to be able to sustain a consistent role in the lineup, and now he's in the transfer portal as well. Those are probably the 2 biggest names, but they might not be the biggest surprises, because Aiden Moffett entering the transfer portal was a bit of a surprise to me, given the fact that he really carved a much bigger role for himself this year compared to last year when he only pitched an inning. But this season he earned a bigger role. I think he threw around 16 innings, really showed some potential. He threw a couple really strong outings against Tennessee, which is the best team in the country, on the road. And I don't know, like that's a guy who I think you were counting on to, really help you at least out of the bullpen this upcoming season. He won't be there. Then there's some other names more on the periphery that have entered the portal. Michael Bucknam, who's a righty, who would have been a junior this upcoming season. Nick Bronzini, who would have been a redshirt sophomore. A few of those sort of pitcher types. And so overall, they've lost 9 guys out of the portal, but the 3 I mentioned earlier are probably the biggest names and the ones that definitely keep it out. And Sam Dutton, he'd be a 4th. Well,
Dutton, exactly. Right? Another guy who pitched. It was a fairly big part of their pitching bullpen.
Yeah, exactly. He was an important part of the bullpen, more important part of the bullpen this season than last. And he was also, he started a decent amount of games his freshman year. But I think what we saw this year is there was a bit of a ceiling to what you're going to get from him, at least from a stuff perspective. So I don't know how much more of a role he was going to be able to carve out here. And that one was a little bit surprising, given that I thought he pitched better and had a bigger role this year than the year before, but it didn't shock me either way.
Okay. There's a lot of questions I could ask, but I'm going to try to keep it to just a handful. Paxton Kling, that one surprised me a little bit. Did he? I mean, I'm asking you to get in his mind, but did he not see a role for himself next year? I mean, there's a couple of guys coming back in the outfield, right? I mean, it seemed like he was on track, would have been on track, at least from my perspective, to possibly be a starter next year. Yeah,
very possibly. Part of this depends on what they want to do with Jake Brown, because Jake Brown, Major League Baseball wanted him as a pitcher, and he played this entire season in the outfield and is very capable defensively. And we saw some flashes of him offensively toward the end of the year. And when I mean the end of the year, I really mean the SEC tournament and the regional. So you have him, you have Ashton Larson, you have Josh Pearson potentially coming back. That combined with some of the frustrations he had offensively, and the fact that he's from Pennsylvania, he's not from around here. It's a bit of a commitment to make that travel, I guess. But yeah, it was something that was at least somewhat on my radar, just because of some of those things and some of the struggles he had offensively, and maybe with a guy that talented, you just need a fresh start, right? And sometimes that's just the best course of action for someone. And given the year that he had, it wouldn't have shocked me if that was that ended up being his decision, I guess.
Cam Johnson. I don't want to pick on the young man, but it seemed like every time I watched an LSU game and saw him pitch, he was walking somebody. I mean, it just seemed like he struggled with some control. As you said, maybe he got a little better late in the year, but wasn't the feeling early on that he might be like a midweek starter or something like that? I mean, or develop into a midweek starter? What do you think held him back? And it seemed like, you're having to start over again, maybe with a new pitching coach somewhere else, maybe with a new pitching style. That's not necessarily going to help his development as much as it might help him staying here. What do you think might be the impetus there for him wanting to transfer?
I think part of it's just trying to find a place where he knows he has a bigger role. He didn't pitch a whole ton this season, and I don't know. I don't know for sure as to why he transferred, but again, a lot of these are just educated guesses. I want to be clear on that. But he didn't have a huge role on this year's team, and given how talented he is, he probably wanted to go to a place where he could work through his mistakes on the field, and it's just hard to do that at a place like LSU where the standard is Omaha or bust every single season, and guys can easily overtake you because they're not that much less talented, if not as talented as you are. Right. So sometimes you can just find yourself lost in the shuffle through that, and I think that might have been what happened with Cam, and I think it is a little bit disappointing for LSU's perspective that he entered the portal, because again, there's just not a lot of high school guys that threw 97 from the left side who end up going to college.
Yeah, so I covered the fall baseball the scrimmage they had with Louisiana Lafayette, and he was just dealing in that game, but it seemed like just didn't transfer to the regular season. The pitcher from Wofford, Zac Cowan. This seems like, okay, is LSU talking to him between games because they're both in the regional? But I mean, how do you think that worked out? Because it does look a little makes you go, how do you think that came about?
Well, my guess is, you can't contact these kids until they enter the portal, right? At least legally. But they definitely we know that they definitely had a good look at him, and Jay Johnson thought very highly of him because of the comments that he had just before the regionals started, and the fact that they were facing Wofford. So,
now, do you know if he started one of the other games?
He started against Long Island through 6 shutout innings, which is about what you would expect.
So someone was watching, yes, obviously,
yes.
When he was pitching.
Yes, and I think how that just came together. I mean, he's just a very pitchable, very talented kid, and I think he's just sort of the perfect guy you can sort of slide into place with that starting pitching role. And I just think, I'd love to ask Jay Johnson this once this becomes officially official and they sign all the paperwork. But with Cowan, I am curious to see like how much did getting to really study him ahead of the regional and influence their decision to bring him on.
Now, real quickly, if you would touch on something else, there was a report about another pitcher from Wofford transferring to LSU, but you found out that's not official yet, or did not come to pass. Do you think it could come to pass?
I don't think it's going to come to pass.
Okay.
I'll just say that.
Okay.
Just based on my reporting, and I would be very, very surprised.
I'm going to go with Koki Riley's reporting. That's what I want. Okay, so not just transfers, but a very talented incoming freshman class. This is the number 1 ranked class coming in, or number 2?
They're number 2, but I think Tennessee's ahead of them because they have more players. Because the average player rating, I guess, is per player rating is LSU is the higher rating in terms of that. That's perfect games rankings at least. Okay,
potato, right? I mean, if you're ranked up there, the top 5,
so they're technically number 2.
Okay.
Yeah,
very good class coming in.
Yes.
Who do you think they're going to be counting on or hope to count on for next season? That can come in and play right away.
Well, it's going to be tough to say because of the draft, right? And there's a trio of guys where I think LSU fans should be incredibly excited if they end up coming. That's William Schmidt, the local right-handed pitcher who pitches at Catholic Baton Rouge. He's probably
the national champion. They were declared national champions.
Yes,
Catholic,
and he was the ace starter on that team. And he throws strikes. He's up to 98 miles an hour. He's one of the best curveballs in the entire
high
draft.
School?
Yes.
Jeez.
Yeah, 96 to 98. He's the real deal. He throws strikes, and I talked to a couple scouts about him, and they were drooling over him, and they thought there was very small chance that he ends up coming to LSU. But among the top 3 guys, he probably is the best shot of coming to school just because he's from here, and he was at the regional in Chapel Hill. So I think there's maybe a 15% chance that he shows up, and a team doesn't reach his number. But we'll see. we'll see. And then there's two other names that we should at least mention. There's Konnor Griffin, who won the Gatorade National Player of the Year, not the Gatorade Player of the Year in Mississippi, the National Gatorade Player of the Year. It's the best player in high school baseball. He's committed to LSU. I think there's a very, 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 very small chance that he comes to school. And same goes with Cam Caminiti, who's Ken Caminiti's cousin.
Right.
Yes. And he is a left-handed pitcher, probably the best left-handed high school pitcher in the draft. He goes to Saguaro High School in Arizona, and I would be shocked if he came to school.
When you say best left-handed pitcher, it's like, okay, they're going to find a way to sign that guy in the pros. So, so
yeah.
Thanks, but we'll wish you luck, right? I mean, that's what else you're going to say.
And the thing is with the draft, though, some people thought Cam Johnson was that guy last year. And he ended up coming to school. So, that's why the draft's just so unpredictable. There are guys who you think are going to come, and then they don't come. Like, there was a Michael Kennedy a couple of years ago who got picked in the 4th round. He ended up going... He ended up going to the Pirates. Like Brady Neal and Jared Jones were two guys who were kind of borderline as to whether they were going to come to LSU or not, and then they end up coming to school at the end of the day. So, again, like all this stuff is pretty unpredictable, but I think it's pretty safe to say that with Caminiti and with Griffin, those two guys in particular, I would be floored if they came here. And Schmidt is a pretty outside shot as well, but I wouldn't be quite as floored, again, because he's an LSU kid, right? Yeah. He goes to school right down the road. Right. So there's definitely a built-in advantage with him in terms of that. Those are the 3 bigger names. And there's a few others that I think LSU fans should definitely keep an eye on as more realistic targets to come to school.
You mentioned one of the catchers,
yes.
Cade Arambidi.
Yes.
He's someone they need and have a shot at getting to come.
Yes, Cade Arambide. He's one of the best high school catchers in the country. He's a guy who's got quite a bit of power. Apparently, he's a cannon of an arm behind the plate, and that's a guy who LSU really needs, because you're losing Hayden Dravinsky, you're losing Alex Milazzo. I mean, Ethan Fry is like an emergency option behind the plate. Same goes with Jared Jones if Jared Jones even comes back. And so you have. So you're really in flux after Brady Neal and Blaze Priester, a catcher. You need a third guy, and to bring in a freshman, a really talented one who can help bridge transition for whenever Brady leaves through the draft, like that would be really big. And I think there's a pretty decent chance that they can bring him onto campus. I don't think it's guaranteed because. Again, this is not at least according to a lot of the scouts and some of the stuff I read, that this isn't the strongest high school class ever. I don't know exactly what that means in terms of how willing teams are to spend extra money to sign some of these guys. But if the teams aren't willing to reach Aaron Bide's price, then he'll be at LSU, and that'll be a really big addition. And they have him. Do you mind if I list off a couple other guys too?
Please.
Okay.
I think our readers are in rapt attention.
Let's hope so. There's Boston Bateman, who's another left-handed pitcher. He's a little bit more unlikely to sign here at LSU. He's around the 50th best prospect in the draft overall, including college guys. He's more of a borderline case as to whether he would come to school or not. I'd say it's more likely that Aaron Bide comes to school than he does, but this team needs left-handed pitching. There's a lot of guys who are in flex who are left-handed pitchers. You look at Justin Lohr. Gage Jump won't be here next season because of the draft. Nate Eckenhausen's out of eligibility. This team needs left-handed pitchers right now. Like Cade Anderson and DJ Primo are really the only 2 guys you can put down in pencil for next year. So he's a guy. He's a name to watch out for. Derek Curiel, who at least was like the top high school player in the country. I don't think scouts look at him quite like that now, but he's still like a borderline top 100 draft prospect, outfielder. Pretty talented kid. He can really put the ball in the bat. And then at third base, Cale Fountain, who is a kid from Lincoln, Nebraska, apparently has quite a bit of power. And I don't know if you've noticed, Rab, but they need third baseman. With Tommy White now, off to Major League Baseball. They need a veteran. They need some younger options as well. And I think getting Kale into the program would be pretty big for this team, and you need a higher ceiling long-term option at third base, because really the first 3 years of Jay's tenure, they've had I don't say they cobbled it together, but they've really leaned pretty heavily on the portal and finding kind of star options at that position.
Yeah, you can't count on that every time if you're looking for one specific position. Okay, a couple of players on this year's team who have the option to go pro or to come back for next year. The people looking at specifically Jared Jones and Griffin Herring. They're drafted. Jared, well, people say he's a sophomore. Well, he's a draft eligible sophomore. Tell us, why they can go, and what do you think the chances are of LSU getting them to come back?
Yeah, with Jared, the cutoff date for sophomores, they have to be 21 by August 1st. Jared Jones turns 21 on August 1st. So this is just really bad luck for LSU. If he was born on August 2nd, then he'd be back with this team next year. So he's draft eligible, and it's going to be really interesting to see. My guess is that either one of him and Herring will go. Okay. And just between those two, I would be a little surprised if both of them went. That would mean quite a bit of interest from Major League Baseball for both those guys. I would say that Jones is more likely to go than Herring, because Jones, again, he has some of the best power in the draft. Maybe outside of Jack Caglione, maybe he has the highest ceiling potential in terms of just being a power hitter. A lot of it's going to come down to how teams sort of view.
He reminded me of Mark McGuire.
Yeah.
He was just big, just a huge guy.
But that's cheating, to be
clear.
Not
implying that, just in size and stature and appearance. He's 6'4"?
Yeah, something like that.
250 pounds. Brian Kelly would love for him to play a little tight end, I'm sure, this year's football team. But yeah, I'm sure he's got the measurables that they like to see in the major leagues.
He hit a ball over 470 feet at the SEC tournament, the SEC tournament championship game. Like, that is ridiculous. I know it's with metal bats, but there's very few human beings who can do that, and he can. And his power potential is definitely something that scout that really jump out the scouts.
Of course, I'm sure it does.
And it's just a matter of how do they view his strikeout rate, and the fact that he did a really good job cutting it down this year, but it was still around 25%, and at the college level. So. And it's also obviously a lot of this just comes down to Jared, like how willing, what's his number, how willing is he to go off to the pros, and how much does he want to build a legacy here at LSU? And we're not going to know that answer until July. So it's going to be really fascinating to see him. And I think given that power potential, and given the fact that Griffin Herring doesn't have a lot of starting experience, doesn't have like an obvious third pitch, he's more of a reliever type. I think given that, and he's also draft eligible because he turns 21 before August 1st, that makes me feel like he's more likely to come back to next year's team. And Jay Johnson has said this a couple times now, that if he came back, he would start. So
he was the one who was mentioning Tuesday as saying he's one of the best pitchers he's been around, right?
Yeah. And I don't think it's an accident that he said that.
Do you think with NIL and what schools can say, look, we can put this together for you if you come back? Especially guys like this who are borderline, like you said, Jared Jones, he could be drafted pretty highly. You could say, look, you're Jared Jones and I'm Jay Johnson. Look, you come back, we're going to give you this. We can put this NIL deal together for you. You're going to develop another year. You have a potential to be a first-round draft pick, which you aren't right now. Get that, like you said, get the strikeout ratio down and stuff like that. Do you think schools have a better shot with guys like that now, or do you think it's still about the same? Because obviously there's more money at the college level. There's just as much money, more money to be had at the major league level.
When you're talking about first and second round money, millions of dollars, probably not in terms of whether.
But he's not a first or second round pick this year, is he?
Potentially, we'll see.
Okay.
I've seen his name outside of top 100 lists, and I've seen his name inside top 60-ish list. So I feel like he feels like an eye of the beholder guy because of when you're talking about a bigger
I can see that.
When you're talking about a bigger baseball player, you're talking about a higher potential to strike out a lot, and he's not necessarily a guy who has a ton of defensive versatility either. So you're really leaning hard on the bat. Right. And some people are just going to look at the power and be like, hey, I'm going to roll the dice on that. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But there's very few, people on the planet who can do what he can do. And then there's others who will, look at more the negative side and sort of pick nits and not be willing to spend $1 million on him, for example. Right. I don't think he's going to be. I'd be surprised if he got picked in the top 15, for example. Right. That would shock me.
He's not Dylan Cruz.
No, he's not Dylan Cruz. Maybe if he came back for another season and really produced, he'd be Dylan Cruz. But I don't totally see that at the moment, at least. But yeah, I think regardless though, he's in the range of the top 3 rounds at the very least, and. For
that's
that
tough.
reason,
that's tough to try
it's
to
just
convince
tough.
someone.
It's just going to be tough. I mean, but then again, we'll see. There's been guys who we thought were in the top 3 round range who just didn't end up, didn't end up, signing out of the draft. Like Chase Shores is another guy. Like he throws 100 miles an hour. He threw 100 miles an hour coming out of high school, and we saw his potential his freshman year, and he was the best pitcher in Texas out of high school, and then he just didn't get drafted. So.
Talk about him for a second. The prospect that of him, what he can contribute next season. How healthy can he be?
Well, I think they're counting on him to be the ace of the staff, to be that plainly, and that's putting a lot of expectation on a young kid who's thrown only 18 innings in college baseball.
Yeah, virtually no college experience.
Yeah, sort of like the Gage jump plan, right? So he misses a year and a half, having to come back off of Tommy John, and it might not always be perfect for him this upcoming season, but he has the tools to be, to be at least a top 2 round pick next year, because again, fastball can be up to 100 miles an hour. Apparently he's already hitting 97 14 months after surgery, and apparently he's also improved his slider, according to Jay Johnson when he talked about him briefly yesterday. So he's just a very, very important piece for this team. They need him to be really good, because I think they're very much counting on him, and even Jaden Newt to a degree, who's also was the #1 pitcher out of California coming out of high school, and has really he's literally pitched an inning since coming to LSU, and most that's because of it, and that's pretty much only because of injury. So at first Tommy John, and then I believe he had like an ankle injury. But he'll pitch on the Cape. He'll pitch in the Cape League this summer, so that will hopefully get him some more innings against college bats before he comes back to LSU in the fall.
Yeah. We could talk endlessly about it's like the hot stove league, the old-fashioned hot stove league. Talking about your favorite players in the offseason. We could talk endlessly about this, and I'm sure we can revisit this subject again. But I wanted to get on the subject of coaches. Koki, I've been doing this almost 35 years. I try not to be surprised by anything. I was surprised to see Paul Mainieri is going to be the head coach at South Carolina next season. He retired in 2021. The college athletics has changed considerably in the time, just the short time that he's been away from the game. You've had the transfer portal is going even more than ever. You have NIL now. You're going to have we're on the eve of revenue sharing for college athletics for college athletes. It's not the game that he coached 20 years ago when he was at Notre Dame, or even when he first came to LSU, but he had that itch, and you talked to him. You get a pretty exclusive interview with him earlier this week. He had that itch to get back in it, and even though he's going to be 67 next season, and I'm not being an ageist. That's only 10 years older than me. Okay, a lot older than Koki, but only 10 years older than me. So, were you surprised at all? And once you talked to him, did it make you feel like I understand more where he's coming from, why he decided to get back into it, or are you still kind of puzzled?
I understand, at least from his perspective, as to why he came. You may or may not disagree with it, but it just made he just sounded like a guy who had been freed from a cage or something, because he was just not comfortable with being retired. He still had the itch to coach. he said he was born to be a coach. Like, this is his life. And when it's sort of taken away from you for reasons that you can't really control, which was his health, and all the neck surgeries and all those, he was just really beat up physically. So that's why he retired in the first place. But coming back now, he's in a much better. At least he claims he's in a much better spot physically than he was 3 years ago. He had 2 extra surgeries, one that sort of numbed his spine and has sort of allowed him to be sort of pain free over this past year or two.
I'd be very wary of having a surgery where they say we're going to numb your spine, but that's just me.
Well, that's what he says. He can play golf pain free now. So I found that to be an interesting little tidbit that he said, and obviously Paul was very kind to speak to us first after it was made official that he was taking the South Carolina job, and it was just a very insightful conversation. We talked for about half an hour and went over a lot of the bigger points that you would think about, and heading into what was such a big decision for him, including the transfer portal and NIL. Like, those two things didn't really exist, didn't exist pretty much at all when he was last coaching, and now it is running the sport. He talked a lot about how he's going to have to sort of how he's obviously adapted through change over the years. There's that point, but there's also the more important point where it's, he's got a pretty strong assistant staff. Monty Lee, who was a head coach at Clemson, who has stayed on at South Carolina to be one of his assistants, and then Terry Rooney, of course, who was an assistant here at LSU this past season, as more of a like a program development and recruiting coach. He will make transition to South Carolina and be their pitching coach and recruiting coordinator.
Yeah, he wasn't really on the field coach for LSU. He was more of a front office kind of guy.
Yes, that was pretty much his role at LSU, and he's going to play a pretty huge role in the way they sort of shape things over at South Carolina. So it's going to be really interesting to see how all this sort of comes to be, and it's going to be, and LSU plays South Carolina at South Carolina next season. So that's going to be a fascinating matchup. It would be really awesome
if they were playing here, and eventually they will. During Mainieri's tenure, I imagine. Yeah, there's all these things that are maybe not foreign to Mainieri, but certainly that are going to be different. But one thing I imagine had to be a huge factor in this is that the athletic director of South Carolina is Ray Tanner, who was the longtime coach there. LSU won the College World Series in 2009. South Carolina then won in 10 and 11. Ray Tanner is now transitioning, a la Skip Bertman, went from being the coach to now is the athletic director. That had to be a big factor in his comfort level. I can't imagine he would have gone just anywhere, but the fact that he knows Ray, and that I'm sure they have a relationship, and they really, obviously have a lot of things in common, had to be a major factor in his decision.
Yeah, Ray was a massive part of why he did this. He mentioned it multiple times in terms of the comfort and the friendship that he has with Ray specifically, and the conversation that they had, at least the initial conversation that they had regarding this job and when he got the job offer was, frankly, a surprise to him. I mean, you can read the story over at theadvocate.com, but
please do. That's why we do this.
But maybe the most interesting part of the piece, at least in my opinion, is the fact that when Ray Tanner first called Paul Mainieri, Paul had no idea he was gonna end up offering him the job. He just didn't figure that was going to be the case. And at first, they sort of just talked about some of the other candidates that Ray had been interviewing and looking over. And then, kind of almost out of the blue, he sort of asked, "Well, would you want to take this job?" Just almost matter of factly like that. And then Paul said he had to think about it, and he took about 24 hours, and then he accepted the job. And this all happened literally just this past weekend. So wow. I think it was one of the reasons why the news came out of the blue on Monday, and everything sort of came together so quickly. It was because of just sort of this very sudden, I guess, decision on both parties' parts to do this.
It's going to be very interesting to see. Obviously, you're not familiar with this, but when Nick Saban was a coach at LSU and then he left He didn't leave to go straight to Alabama. Remember, he went to the Miami Dolphins, then he went to Alabama, and he went from this beloved figure. Nick, you brought the program to another level. To we hate your guts, because you're beating us all the time. And so I don't think it's going to be like that, but it's going to be interesting to see because Mainieri, he told you he wants to move back here once he's done coaching in South Carolina, and he played a year at LSU. He spent a long time here as the coach, won a national championship. But I'm reminded of another South Carolina coach. I'm reminded of Steve Spurrier, who went to Florida, was a coach at Florida. Coached in the pros. That didn't work well with Washington, and he went to South Carolina. But he's still a Florida Gator at heart. He had played for them and won a Heisman Trophy there, and it's still has been welcomed back into the fold. I kind of wonder what it's going to be like for Paul Mainieri when they come to play LSU eventually in Alex Box Stadium, and he's in that other dugout. And what do you think the fan reception will be of Mainieri? I imagine there'll be some people who are really disappointed with him, but then you've seen they've dealt with Mike Bianco, a former LSU catcher and assistant coach, coming here for Ole Miss for years.
Yeah. I just think it's going to be absolutely fascinating, sort of like you said. And one of the things that Paul did say is that he's not really looking forward to the day when LSU has to play South Carolina.
He told you, I can't root against LSU. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, when he plays them, he wants to win.
Yeah, exactly. But in general, that's probably one of the few drawbacks for him in taking this job is having to face LSU, and it just felt like that. He didn't leave LSU to go to South Carolina. He was retired and then went to South Carolina. Like you said with the Nick Saban thing, it's there's a big difference in that, and it's also not like South Carolina has been a longtime rival in baseball with LSU directly. You know what I mean? They're not Mississippi State, they're not Texas A&M, and I think Paul even mentioned that to me in terms of what. In terms of the distinctions of in terms of the way
I think it would be very different if he went to Mississippi State.
Exactly.
I think it would be very different. Yeah.
For example. So
what is the end game here for Paul Mainieri, for Ray Tanner, for South Carolina as an athletic program by hiring him? Because obviously he's not going to. You wouldn't think he's going to coach there for 10 years. He's going to be 67 in August. So a few years. What is the goal? This is a South Carolina program that has had success not on LSU's level, but they've won a couple of national championships. And once you've won a couple, the expectation is there to be a powerhouse program again and be one of those top half of the SEC programs that can win the College World Series or certainly can go on a fairly regular basis. What do you think is the goal? What do they both get out of this?
For Paul, I think the goal is pretty obvious in that he just wants to get back to coaching again. He yearns for this. What other way to put it? And I think in his bones that he always wanted to come back, and he was never satisfied with being retired.
And he had flirted with a couple of other schools too, right?
Exactly.
Miami, where he's from, and what was the other school?
And Notre Dame. Notre Dame,
too,
which is where he literally came from to come to LSU
which
in the first
also
place.
Loved, yeah.
He also loved it there. But he wasn't quite healthy enough to get back to coaching at Notre Dame. In the Miami position, it was moving to a much bigger city, and the circumstances just never really quite fit for him with Miami. And then, but with the South Carolina gig, it was just the right time and the right place for him to get back into coaching. And part of that had to do with Ray Tanner. And speaking of the end game for Ray Tanner, it's to jumpstart this program again. They haven't made the College World Series since 2012. So, and that's just for a program that won back-to-back national titles. That's just not acceptable. And I think Tanner wanted to do something. It seemed like Tanner wanted to get a big name here. He also talked with Brian O'Connor, who is the head coach at Virginia, for that job, because
a Paul Mainieri disciple.
Paul Mainieri disciple. And so Paul Mainieri actually knew that Tanner was calling him because he contacted O'Connor first, because O'Connor then told Mainieri that he was contacted by Tanner. Okay. And I know that's a mouthful, but that's kind of what Paul and
Virginia and Brian
told
O'Connor,
me.
they're in the World Series, so he would have had to wait longer for him potentially. If he was his guy.
Yeah.
So.
But that would have been a big fish, right? And I think they were. It seemed to me, or at least from what the South Carolina people have been saying, that they were big game hunting here. This was not. They really wanted to make a splash. They really wanted to get someone who was a proven winner and a proven champion, and that's Paul Mainieri. So so it makes sense from their perspective, just in terms of that. Whether it's like the right decision, that can be, we can debate that till the cows come home. But his lack of experience in NIL and the portal, like, that's going to be huge. Like, how is he going to be able to navigate that stuff? How open is he going to be able to? How open is he to that stuff really in general? What's going to be his reaction when his star freshman pitcher enters the portal, just as a theoretical, will he be able to encourage boosters enough to pitch in for NIL money, right? Like those are the sort of questions that I sort of have that we're not going to really know until how everything sort of turns out, because we know he's good at evaluating talent. Heck, a lot of this LSU roster are guys that he recruited in the first place. Ashton Larson and Stephen Milam didn't commit to Jay Johnson at first. They committed to Paul Mainieri at first because again, like, until pretty recently, high school guys could commit in 8th grade if they wanted to. So I think he'll find very talented players, and I think he'll recruit very hard when he has a guy like Terry Rooney, especially in his corner. But again, it's the NIL stuff and the transfer portal stuff that really transforms rosters. That that's going to be the biggest obstacle for him, I think, for sure.
And we've seen it with this NIL transfer portal era. We've seen a very interesting dynamic with veteran coaches. Some of them are like, "I'm out." Nick Saban said, "I'm out." It's changed so much. The players have changed so much. I don't want. That's one of the reasons. One of the reasons he decided to get out. Mike Krzyzewski, probably some of the reasons. Roy Williams, Tara Vanderveer at Stanford. Realignment is something else. Tara Vanderveer, I've been told, did not want to have to go play a conference game across the country from Stanford to Rutgers. And they're coming to LSU as part of the ACC-SEC challenge.
Yeah.
That sounds very weird, but Stanford is in the ACC, and they're going to be in the SEC-ACC challenge, playing a game in the PMAC in December. But some coaches have embraced the change and try to figure out how to make it work to their advantage. And I'm thinking of specifically Brian Kelly and Kim Mulkey, two coaches in their early 60s, a little bit younger than Mainieri, but who have been head coaches a long time and had to deal with things one way, and now they're dealing with things a different way. And Brian Kelly told me in a recent interview, he said, "I like to deal with the chaos and try to figure out how we can work to our advantage." And Kim Mulkey has surrounded herself with assistant coaches who can help her deal with the portal and NIL and that sort of thing. So interesting if Mainieri can do it or not. I mean, there's less control. I think the biggest thing is control for these coaches. They're used to just virtually complete control of their progress, and a lot has shifted to the athletes in terms of control. It's a very interesting dynamic, and it's not for everybody. He's going to find out very quickly if it is or not for him.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it's just going to be such a big obstacle for him, because you can say that you're going to do all the right things now, but once the bullets start flying, you just never know. And I think that's what I'm trying to say here. And that's going to be the biggest obstacle for South Carolina in terms of this hire. But again, in terms of a talent evaluation standpoint, I think he still got it, because look, like, a lot of that national championship team are Mainieri guys. Most of it is. Right. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this all sort of shakes out moving forward.
Mainieri couldn't scratch that itch and come back to coach at LSU because LSU has a coach in Jay Johnson, although his name has been publicly mentioned at Texas, which also still has a coach. David Pierce, the former coach at Tulane, is the coach there. They lost in the College Station Regional to Louisiana Lafayette. They got eliminated by them. They went like 36-24. He's won some games there. They've had a couple of College World Series appearances. I'm sure won a couple of Big 12 titles. But the question is now, there's a lot of talk about whether he's going to stay, and if Texas will go looking for a big name, and Jay Johnson could be as big a name as any. When we spoke to Jay on Tuesday, he was asked about it. I don't want to say he gave a denial, but he kind of gave the garden variety answer that coaches give, that no one's contacted me, which coaches can say, right? Because they have agents, they have lawyers, they have go-betweens.
Athletic directors.
Yeah, you can always insulate yourself from that question and say, no, they haven't talked to me. They've talked to these other people, but they haven't talked to me. But I don't know, Koki. I don't want to. I'm really not trying to look at this from an LSU lens, but I know Texas is a great program and they got lots of money and they got great facilities and all that. But it does seem like a lateral move at best, to go from LSU to Texas. I mean, do you think this is a real thing that? Bottom line, for the viewer, the reader, do you think this is a real thing that LSU fans need to be concerned about? Should the Texas job actually open up, which as we're recording this, it has not.
Yeah, first of all, the job hasn't even opened up. Second of all, I'm afraid this might, fly into my face at some point because, everything lives forever on the internet. But I think it's more likely that pigs start flying than Jay Johnson going to Texas, if I'm being totally honest. And I just believe that because he's just a very single-minded guy, and I just don't see I don't see what Texas brings to the table that he doesn't have here already at LSU. And you can mention the money part, sure, but I don't think he doesn't do this for the money. This is a guy who lives.
The money's nice, but it does not seem to be his main motivation.
No, it's not. It's not his main motivation. His main motivation is to win national championships, and he can still he's proven that he can do that here already. And and the resources to win those national championships. And granted, they're not throwing around money the same way a Texas or Texas A&M does in terms of NIL and recruits. But
as we've seen in those schools, money doesn't necessarily buy you championships.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, LSU's won the national title before Texas A&M or Texas did. So I just don't see what Texas would bring to the table that would be a real threat to Jay Johnson. And I don't really see a reason why Jay Johnson would want to leave.
I agree with you. We both may come up. That aged well.
Yeah.
But for now, I agree with you. Now that doesn't mean that Jay Johnson might not want to leverage the situation. He just got a new contract last year after winning the College World Series. Doesn't mean he might not want to. Yeah, squeeze a couple more $100,000 more out of LSU.
That's just
as he was leaving the press conference.
The Dan Hurley playbook, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I'm staying for a price. He mentioned when he was leaving the press conference the other day, just kind of in passing, we were asking him about traveling to go see players, and he was talking about traveling commercial.
Yeah, that was interesting.
I'm sure he wouldn't mind access to a private jet. Can you imagine Jay Johnson, how many places he probably would go? I mean, the guy, he said, I was trying to remember the exact word. He said, my life revolves around the College World Series or going to Omaha.
Going to Omaha.
And he's married, but they don't have kids. I mean, this is everything he's about.
Yes.
And I don't see him ever going coaching the pros, anything like that. I don't think he dreams of coaching the New York Mets or something like that.
No.
In his case,
he's referenced the Yankees multiple times as this being a better job than coaching the New York Yankees. So,
so. We should always stay on our guard as journalists. That's our job, to watch these things for you. But like I said, first of all, there has to be a job opening. Second of all, now I will say this: Jay Johnson, and he's a big fan of Nick Saban, his coaching style, and his the way he does things, and certainly his success. When Nick Saban was the coach here, every year it was a thing: is he going to the pros? Is he going to leave? Is he going to leave? And he finally did. Mm-hmm. Obviously, go to the Miami Dolphins in 2004. But I do think this could be something. If it's not this year, I don't think this is the last time we're going to see Jay Johnson's name come up for a big job, assuming he stays at LSU long term. I think it's something you're going to have to kind of get used to.
Yeah, I mean, every big coach is going to have their name floated around for bigger jobs now, because we've seen the likes of Lincoln Riley going from Oklahoma to USC, Brian Kelly going from Notre Dame to LSU, Kim Mulkey going from Baylor to LSU. Big names are flying from big school to big school just a lot more often now in general, for whatever reason. Right. And a lot of those reasons.
How about John Calipari from UK to Arkansas?
But usually there's at least a couple tea leaves that make sense when stuff like that happens, But for example, there were the Brian Kelly from LSU to Michigan rumors from 6 months ago, and I never bought those either because I never could find the tea leaves for that, right?
Yeah.
The Calipari stuff, that was shocking in the moment, but there were also tea leaves being like, well, is he even going to come back this next year at Kentucky?
The pressure was mounting at Kentucky. Brian Kelly, and coming from Notre Dame, there's still people like, how could he leave Notre Dame to go to LSU? Well, he didn't think he could win a national championship at Notre Dame. He thought he had a better shot here.
That was a resources
Kim Mulkey, she wouldn't have left Baylor except to come back to Louisiana.
Yeah, and she's from here. Like Jay Johnson's from California. He's not from Texas. There's no real connection with him and Texas. I guess there was no real connection between Arizona and just being near the West Coast and coming to a place like LSU. But LSU, quite frankly, just has more resources to win a national championship in baseball than Arizona does. That's just a fact. So, and obviously there's the history of that, and and everything that comes along with being the LSU baseball coach. No offense to Arizona, and Arizona also has their own financial troubles. But
now I will say, Koki went to Arizona State, so the chance to get in a dig at Arizona, he's not going to let it pass him by. So, but continue.
That may be true, but Arizona State's having their own troubles in baseball too, and that's a whole another podcast for another day. But they're having their resource problems for sure. But anyway, it's just the fact that I just don't see a reason why Jay Johnson would leave from LSU to Texas, even outside of just knowing him and knowing his staff and knowing the amount of commitment he puts into making LSU baseball. It's because they are.
Oh, bless you. Whew. Yeah, you got a lot in there. So but no, I agree with you. Obviously, time will tell. But I agree with you. I think Jay is going to be here next year. He certainly talked a lot about building this roster for next year and building year to year. I think that disappoints him a little bit instead of building more traditionally. Yeah. But I think he at least accepts the new way of doing things in college athletics. We could talk about all this stuff a little more, but we're gonna wrap up. Let me wrap up with a couple of Olympic things because we're only 43 days away from the opening ceremony in Paris. This week we found out officially that two former LSU beach volleyball players, Kristen Nuss, who went to school at Mount Carmel in New Orleans, and Taryn Cloth, are officially on the USA beach volleyball team going to Paris. They had already made enough points. I don't know why they waited till now to say this, because they already accumulated enough points back in March to make the team. But they did. They're on a roll. They just won their last tournament in Portugal, beating the #1 team in the world, Brazil. They're going to be the #2 seeded pair in Paris for the Olympics. And so I think people ask me, do they have a real shot to gold medal? They have a real shot to win the gold medal. They really do, especially since they finally know they could beat the Brazilians.
That's cool.
So we'll see. They got one more tournament in Switzerland. Boy, that's rough, huh? And they got to go to Switzerland and come back. Then they're going to Paris for the Olympics. And do you know where they're going to play in Paris, Koki?
No, I'd love to know, though.
They're building a temporary beach volleyball stadium with the Eiffel Tower as the backdrop. It's called Eiffel Tower Stadium. It's like an outdoor basketball-sized arena in the park right at the foot of the Eiffel Tower.
That's amazing.
It's probably the coolest venue at the Olympics.
And as we should mention, you will be there for that.
Well, yes, I will be there. And they play they're going to be in the opening ceremony. They're planning to take part in the opening ceremony, which will be on the Seine, and then the next day. Beach volleyball starts. Don't know their schedule yet, but beach volleyball starts. It runs the whole Olympics, basically. So I really think people are going to be interested in their story. I think people are going to really follow them because they've got a great chance to not only medal, but to win the whole thing. And a meteoric rise. Taryn Cloth has only been playing beach volleyball since she came to LSU a few years ago, and because she said there was no beach volleyball in South Dakota where she grew up. So pretty interesting. So also I wanted to mention we've got a bunch of Olympic trials that are coming up. That are getting started. Swimming starts Saturday in Indianapolis. A lot of local athletes going there. Track and field trials start on June 21st in Eugene, Oregon. And then gymnastics is June 27th in Minneapolis. LSU has a recruit, Kalea Lincoln, got an outside shot to make that team. It's only the hardest team, in my opinion, in the world to make, the U.S. women's gymnastics team. Because there's a few people already going to be on that team. But Kalia Lincoln has a shot, and we're going to see if she has a chance to make it to Paris.
Isn't there a girl named Simone on the team who's pretty good?
Simone Biles, she's pretty good. I think there's 5 spots. I think she's got 1. And so there's basically a group of athletes who are basically competing for 1 or 2 spots. It's tough. It's going to be tough. And, of course, LSU's Aaliyah Finnegan is already going. But we're keeping up with the LSU athletes that are going. Mondo Duplantis is going. We're going to see. But Sha'Carri Richardson, I think she's going to go. But got to make that time in Eugene. You got to make the top 3.
Yeah.
That's it.
I have one. I do have one question for you specifically, though.
All right.
The most important question is, how close is your hotel to the Eiffel Tower?
Not very. The Olympic people, they said, here's where you're staying. I'm staying actually in a suburb of Paris called Rueil-Malmaison, if I'm saying that right. It's where
sounds right.
It's where Josephine Bonaparte is buried.
Oh wow!
She lived and died in this little town, and so but I'm close to the train, and so it's going to take me taking a train and a bus to the Eiffel Tower. Probably would take about an hour to get there from where I am. But they didn't ask me where I wanted to stay because I think I'm going to be at the Eiffel Tower Stadium quite a bit. That and track and swimming and gymnastics are going to be our main things. I wish I was a little closer, but c'est la guerre.
Well, at least you're near a very historical landmark. So.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I hope to get over to see there's a little church where she's buried. I hope to get to see that at some point. I have no idea, but what the time demands are going to be. But we're going to find that out, and we're going to talk about the Olympics and more about LSU athletes going to the Olympics. We got more baseball. We're getting closer to football season. We're gonna talk about that more, especially as we get near media days. So. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, right? I mean, this is LSU, covering LSU sports. Some schools, they get months off. Once basketball's over, they're done. Not us. No, it's baseball. It's all the other sports. LSU's really good in a lot of things, and so we have to talk about them, which makes our jobs much more interesting. So thank you for watching today. We appreciate your patronage. Hope you will patronize Caesar Sportsbook as they're a sponsor of today's podcast. For Amelia Cotton behind the glass, for Koki Riley. Koki, very informative. Koki really knows his stuff. He's a baseball guy. And how are the Red Sox doing?
500 again.
500 again.
They've been stuck at 500 for 2 weeks. I'm not even kidding. It's this incredible streak. But anyway.
And the Yankees are winning, which makes you even more unhappy.
That's a bummer.
Sheldon Mickles is happy, but
at least the Celtics are 1 win away from winning the finals. So
well,
that's the
true.
one good thing.
I'm sorry, we didn't mention the Celtics. Yeah, they are up 3-0 on the Dallas Mavericks. So I know you're happy about that.
I'm very happy about that. Yes.
Very good. So this is Scott Rabalais for Koki Riley, and for all our crew saying thank you for watching. This has been the LSU Sports Insider.